Captain to engineering, we need more power to the plot. I'm giving her all she's got, Captain. I don't think she can take much more. Are you sure? I think we can have more plot. I fed her a red angel, I fed her red bursts, I fed her mothered figures, I fed her section 31, I fed her Captain Pike, I fed them explanations for canon inconsistencies. Well, what if you fed her a time crystal? A what? A time crystal. Just because you're saying it important doesn't mean it's a thing. I looked them up on Wikipedia. Alrighty, I'll throw in the time crystal, but I'm not sure if it'll work. Just remember to have faith. This season of Star Trek Discovery is brought to you by the theme of faith. Alright, I hope you guys enjoyed that. Welcome to my review of Star Trek Discovery Season 2 Complete Review. I do have some certain bullet points that I want to hit with this review, but generally it's just going to be me talking it out with all of you. But just quick housekeeping to get done. First things first, Sacred Text is going to be my look at Star Trek as if it were a sacred text. We're going to be looking at each individual episode and looking at it through certain thematic analyses and wondering what can we learn about ourselves and humanity through these texts. That's not to say that these texts are perfect, but that there are some things that we can learn by using that sort of analysis of Star Trek. I'm planning on doing written video essays and analyses of this season of Star Trek Discovery to tide us over until the Picard series. Basically, I'll be doing thematic looks at each individual characters and their arcs throughout this entire season, and they're going to be a lot of fun. The first one is going to be on Captain Pike, coming out in 3 weeks. We'll be getting those fairly regularly, so keep an eye out for those. And if my Star Trek video essays and Sacred Treks and everything else that I'm doing on this channel sounds interesting to you, give my channel a subscribe. I promise you won't regret it. We do a ton of awesome content here, and I'd love to have you along for the ride. And if you want to help make that ride even better, consider giving to my Patreon page. Every little bit counts, and it honestly means a lot to me if you contribute to my Patreon to help me really fulfill my dream of doing this more regularly and improving the quality of it. Just like these folks here, thank you so much to everyone who gives to my Patreon page. Alright, so diving back into my analysis of this season of Star Trek Discovery. Generally speaking, before I dive into the specifics, I will say I do have some problems with the show, but overall I am very positive on it. I think it was far from perfect. I think some of the plot got convoluted at certain points, and I'll dive into the specifics of that in a moment. But generally, I'm leaving this season very happy with what they gave me. So for the structure that I'm going to be doing this for, I'm going to be talking about a couple positives up at the top, but then I'm going to be mainly focusing on all my negatives, and then I'll end with all the positives and good things that I thought about this season. So it's going to have that sort of bow structure. So the first thing that I want to talk about is the course correction of the show. So coming off of Season 1, a lot of people had problems with the look and tone of Star Trek Discovery Season 1. They thought it was too dark, it didn't really feel like a Trek show, didn't have that optimism that everyone loves about Trek, and just visually it was a very darker, more toned down show. The Captain Lorca, was someone that we didn't really want to look up to, we didn't want to aspire to. Obviously he turned out to be evil. We didn't really have a focus on a bridge crew. We were focusing on different individual characters who weren't really the normal mixture that we get for a Star Trek show. And it was just a very different feel for a Star Trek show that we had ever had before. Now, my defense of Season 1 of Star Trek Discovery is a topic for a whole different video. Will say, I do like Season 1 of Star Trek Discovery quite a bit. That being said, I do understand people feeling a little bit put off by the fact that this was such a darker show when Star Trek had been off the air for so long. I mean, we had waited for years and years to finally get a Trek show, and coming back to that tone for a Trek show felt a little bit weird, felt off. So coming back for Star Trek Discovery Season 2, they really seemed to want to address that head on, and that was really initially a positive for many fans. The tone was much brighter, we got a lot of colors, we even got like the candy colored uniforms from the original series with Pike in the initial episode. Just the saturation and visual quality was just turned up in terms of brightness. The tone became much funnier and jokier. We got Captain Pike, who was a much more positive captain, joking with his crew and making like weird dad jokes the entire time. The mystery that was set up wasn't war, but wonder and curiosity looking at the red bursts. We even had Captain Pike do a roll call of all the characters on the bridge to give us their names, because again, one of the common refrains from Season 1 is that we don't even know the bridge crew's names. So all this stuff goes to show that they really wanted to course correct the series. And then as the series continued, especially for the first half of the season, we got very, very individual episodic episodes that really felt like true Star Trek style, harkening back to the original series. And nothing felt more like that than New Eden, which was very much a let's go down to a planet, it's very Earth-like, and there's going to be some cool social idea that we're going to be talking about here, but it had this very Trekkian idea of all these different faiths coming together to work together to make a new faith. That felt very Federation-y, but in a way that Star Trek had never really tackled before. Star Trek had generally, in terms of at least human religions, been very secular. I know we got some discussion of religions on shows like Deep Space Nine, but in terms of humanity's religion, we hadn't really talked about it until now. So it was such a cool Star Trek idea brought into something new that we hadn't really seen before. And so those first 2 episodes really showed this sort of really interesting reinvigoration and rejiggering of what Star Trek meant and what Star Trek Discovery meant. And honestly, I really, really liked that. And that goes for the entire first half of the season. Unlike Star Trek Discovery Season 1, where it was super serialized, and honestly, even looking back now, I can't even really remember where specific story beats happen. It all kind of blurs together because it's telling one cohesive story. Which is not a bad thing necessarily, but it was its own particular style. Here, though, on the second season of Star Trek Discovery, each individual episode felt like it had its own idea, its own theme, and its own concept that it was trying to handle, and being much more episodic. I remember the episode like New Eden, Brother, Opal for Charon, where we got the sphere data, The Sound of Thunder, where we were dealing with the Kelpians, all these really fantastic, fun, episodic episodes that did tie into this Red Angel, Red Burst idea going on, but definitely felt like it was its own thing. And I think it was smart of the writers initially to really give us a more nebulous story. Instead of a war story, which is just sort of, you have to deal with the war and go all the way through, the Red Burst was something much more nebulous that you could kind of touch upon and go through, but still have your own individual adventures throughout the entire thing. So I really think that the first half of this season was super strong because of that episodic structure. Again, I personally like the serialized structure of the first season, but if they were going to go more episodic, I think that was the way to go. I think the only episode in the first half of the season that I didn't really love was the Saints of Imperfection, the one where Tilly goes into the mycelial network. Now, certainly there were some things to love about that episode, especially bringing back Hugh Culbert, who was a character I loved and I thought they really mistreated, especially as an LGBT character. But that episode didn't really work for me. But to be honest, having only one failure in the first 7 or 8 episodes of the season is honestly really awesome in my book. And some people liked the Saints of Imperfection. However, talking about the sort of looser structure of the first half of the season, I will say one of the biggest failings of the first half of the season was the search for Spock. This got a bit frustrating as we kept trying to play catch up and try and find Spock, and they really slowly unraveled that character's introduction. We all knew he was coming, we all wanted to see him, but they kept pushing it off and pushing it off. The one that frustrated me the most is when they finally catch his shuttle and it's Georgiou on there, and we don't really get an explanation for why she's there. That got really frustrating after a point. When we finally did get Spock, he was great, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on in my review, but it was a bit frustrating just constantly putting off Spock more and more and more and more and more throughout the season. It just kind of got annoying, and so it made, when he finally did appear on screen, for him to feel a little bit lackluster, especially the way he was introduced, basically down in a cave rambling like a madman. Now, that probably would have been okay if we had done that in the 2nd or 3rd episode. I don't necessarily need to have this big grandiose moment with Spock and have him show look, he's a legendary character, and have some sort of praise to Spock going on. But the fact that you had built him up so much and we kept wanting and wanting and wanting to see him, and then when we finally do see him, it was just kind of like, yeah, he's there. That felt a bit disappointing and a bit anticlimactic. As you can tell, I'm kind of getting into my negatives before I get back into my positives. So I talked about how I really loved the first half of the season. Now, I have to say, the second half of the season, excluding the final 2 episodes, which I'll get to in a bit, I think had its moments, but really it kind of was dealing with the problem of not having dealt with its plot so directly for the entire half of season 1. There was a 4-episode stint, I believe, starting with the episode Project Daedalus, where everything kind of got really focused on dealing with all this plot and trying to resolve all this plot of what is the Red Angel? What's going on here? Why is all sentient life in the galaxy going to be killed? And it honestly just got more and more convoluted as the story went on. It was Michael Burnham in the Red Angel suit, and actually it turns out to be Michael Burnham's mom. Section 31's doing some stuff. Control is an AI thing that we didn't even really get to see until the last 3 or 4 episodes, and that was supposed to be the main villain of the series. It just all felt like it was trying to fix all these loose ends really, really quickly in a way that didn't really necessarily feel satisfying and felt honestly kind of confusing. I don't think that the plot really ever coalesced in anything super, super interesting that I wanted to see. The only thing that I found to be particularly interesting was the idea of Control, more on him in a second, and Michael Burnham's mother being alive. It also ran the risk of Michael Burnham being considered too important. There's already a big subsection of the fandom that really does not like Michael Burnham and thinks that she is a Mary Sue or that she's too important to the story. Now, I don't generally mind that. I mean, honestly, we kind of get like Mary Sue super important lead characters in other Star Trek shows, especially with Captain Kirk and Sisko. I think those two characters perhaps are the most important to the galaxy numerous times. In fact, I think Sisko was literally birthed by gods in order to come into existence. So just putting perspective on what Michael Burnham here is. But having it be her mom, and then eventually be her at the end that released the red signals, did make the universe feel kind of small. I know a lot of fans were counting on there being some big ideas, like maybe it was the Iconians, maybe it was something else that was the Red Angel, and having it just be Michael Burnham felt like, oh yeah, that's like the first idea of what I thought it was going to be. It could have even been something like Saru or Captain Pike himself or Spock. Just something to throw us off the trail a little bit. Having it be Michael Burnham and Michael Burnham's mother felt like it was just right on nail on the head with what that mystery was going to be. And so it kind of felt a little bit lackluster in my opinion. The twist that it was her mom made it a little bit better, but ultimately she was just kind of discarded after a certain point, even though I really liked her scenes. And I hope we get to see more of her next season. And also in all of this plot jumble, we kind of lost the narrative thread of faith. We were told at the beginning of this season that the big thematic idea behind this was the idea of faith. And this was exemplified both in the idea of the Red Angel and some of the ideas of like the second episode with New Eden, where we were dealing with faith. And they also said it was about finding faith in themselves, not just direct faith. But that idea excited me because it looked like they were, again, evoking angel imagery and evoking actual religions in the second episode of the season. Actually showed me that they were going to address faith and belief head on. Pike himself talked about being a religious person and having at least a spiritual side to himself. I will get to the characters in a second and we'll talk about how that theme of faith does come into them as characters, but it's a kind of a nebulous idea. And I was kind of disappointed that we lost this narrative thread of faith. If you take out the characters and just ask me what the plot was of season 2, I don't think you could really talk about it in terms of this idea of faith, which is kind of sad. They had some really great setup, like what if they talked about this idea of the Red Angel being an angel, and maybe it was messing with time, and people got the idea for angels in our iconography from this mechanical Red Angel. And what does that say about our religion? Can we still believe something that we know is human-made and human thought of? Just throwing that out there. That would have been an interesting thread for them to go down. They didn't necessarily have to do it that way. What it meant, though, is it sacrificed the season-long theme that I thought made season 1 so strong. Season 1, while you couldn't really pick out individual episodes, had a really strong theme of trying to win back our virtue, trying to win back our morality after we had lost it. How do we redeem ourselves? How do we hold on to what makes us good people, even in the darkest of times? You can pick out so many themes and threads from season 1 of Star Trek Discovery that really hit at that sort of core idea, just in the plot. But in season 2, the plot really doesn't deal with faith at all. It's like Control doesn't really feel like it's a theme of faith. The Red Angel suit just becomes this time travel suit. That sort of loss of theme really was disappointing for me for a show that had billed itself as a much more serialized Trek. And yes, we got the serializedness in terms of there being a running plot through. A serialized show should have a running theme season to season, and this season kind of lost that thread. Speaking of lost threads, here's my last big negative of this season, was the lackluster villains. And I think there were two major villains throughout the season. Section 31 initially, and then Control at the end. Section 31 I always liked as a concept, and I really liked it when it shows up in Deep Space Nine, as well as the novels that it appears in. However, when it shows up here in season 2 of Discovery, we kind of get a lot of people telling us that it's an evil organization, that it does have a morally gray foundation. And we kind of know that from what we see in the future. But this version of Section 31 is much more integrated into Starfleet than the future version that we see, giving us a lot of questions about what does that mean? How does Section 31 work within Starfleet? And then eventually, how does it fall from grace and basically get hidden from view to the point where nobody in the 24th century knows about it? And I'm sure we may possibly get some of those questions answered in the possible Section 31 spin-off series. But they really needed to do a lot of groundwork to make it worthwhile to bring it in here, instead of it feeling like it was a little bit forced. And ultimately, they didn't really do that. Again, like I said, they paid a lot of lip service to the fact that Section 31 was a morally gray organization. But we really didn't get to see them doing anything morally gray. Sure, Leland in the one episode, The Saints of Imperfection, did some questionable stuff about like not saving Discovery when he could have, and a few other things like that. But generally, they didn't really do anything all that wrong. They just kind of get taken over by Control. And Control AI actually made sense as a thing. So you couldn't tell me it's like, oh, their hubris made them fall from grace, like something like Tony Stark and Ultron. It was just like, no, something fell out of their control. And I just wish we had gotten a little bit more deep dives into Control before we actually got it as a villain. So maybe that Section 31 was doing something nefarious with Control, like trying to control the Federation, like control average everyday citizens, or control Starfleet personnel through this AI, and that's why it became so smart and rebelled against them. Just something to give us a little bit more about what Section 31 was evil. Instead, we got a lot of infighting between Georgiou and Leland, which again was interesting, but ultimately didn't really culminate in anything because Leland just got killed by Control. And yeah, we got Georgiou at the end eventually beating Leland Control, but it didn't really feel like a culmination of that whole arc that we bothered to watch with the two of them, which was actually somewhat interesting. Because I could have, again, jumping on some possible narrative threads that they could have gone down, Georgiou is clearly an evil character, so maybe she takes over Section 31 and makes it super evil. But again, that didn't really actually happen. And then we have to talk about Control. Big problem with Control is that we never really get its motivations. Yeah, we know it wants to destroy all life in the galaxy, but why? Why does it want to do that? Ultimately, it just becomes a flat villain, just enabling the plot to move forward. And it's also unclear why it needs the sphere data in order to become sentient. And I also got confused by where it was coming from. We had the Control from the future come back and infect Arium, but then it kind of gets dealt with, and then I was confused about whether we were dealing with just the Control from our time, or if it was the Control from the future trying to make itself sentient in the present. So it was already sentient, sent it back itself in time to basically make a bootstrap paradox and make itself sentient. But I don't think that was what they went for either. This was the Control AI of our time trying to become sentient. But I feel like the fact that it's making choices and doing things on its own means that it's already sentient. So why does it need more sentience? It was just a sort of a nebulous idea that didn't really make any sense to me, and ultimately made it feel like a confusing villain and a lackluster villain because it really didn't do anything other than just be evil. There we had a few moments where we could have seen that, where it was talking to Leland in the holograms, which is a creepy scene, but again, it didn't really tell us anything other than what we already knew. And that was kind of very disappointing to see that in the loss of that villain. Especially when Season 1's villains were so interesting, especially when you had Georgiou, you had Lorca, you had L'Rell, you have Voq, you have T'Kuvma, all really high-end Star Trek villains. So it's disappointing that we didn't get to see that in this season. Alright, so that's enough of my negatives. Let's talk about the amazing positives that go into the season. Because I think one of the strongest things throughout this entire season, outside of the initial batch of episodes, which I thought were very strong and had strong plot, was the strong character work throughout this entire season. Like I said, I'm going to be doing individual episodes on the different themes within the characters, but I have to say that there were some really standout moments for almost every single character. Saru dealing with his sister in Serana, and also the episode in Opal for Charon, really showcased the amazing talents of Doug Jones. I loved his arc and his moments that he had, basically going through Vahari and sharing with Michael Burnham and sharing with his sister and dealing with the Ba'ul. All of these moments were super strong and really informed his character and finding faith in himself, and I really loved Saru's arc throughout the rest of the season that was much more subtle. Yes, we never got another Saru episode at that point, but we really saw him coming into his own and making his own command decisions to eventually sit down in the captain's chair and lead the Discovery in an amazing battle in the final 2 episodes. It really was a really strong arc for him at the top, and then a more subtle, subdued one for the rest of the season that did end up having a great culmination. Georgiou also got some interesting stuff as well. We got to see her growing into being kind of a more good person and caring about Burnham and finding a sort of motherly attitude towards her that eventually culminated in the episode with Burnham's mother, where Georgiou went to protect Burnham at all costs. And I really kind of liked that arc. It wasn't as strong as the other ones, but we did get a small arc for Georgiou becoming less evil, and do we not trust her? And I think that will hopefully carry on into Star Trek Discovery Season 3. Also a really strong character relationship with Hugh and Stamets. Never before have I seen a storyline that good in Star Trek about relationships. Relationships in Star Trek have always been kind of somewhat lackluster. There have been a few, but mostly romantic relationships in Star Trek have been kind of disappointing. So I really liked that this show didn't shy away from the fact that they killed Hugh, that it actually had some sort of ramifications for that character, and really dealt with issues of disassociation, PTSD, and how to love someone when you feel like you don't have control of your own body, you don't know your own body. A lot of people said like, oh, it's too sci-fi a concept, but honestly, what Hugh goes through in those episodes is very similar to what the trauma of people who go through PTSD feel like their body is not their own. So I really like that they gave that weight and actually took us through the whole season for us to get to the end. And again, something that I hope continues into season 3. I hope their relationship isn't smooth sailing from now on, but that they actually still have some things to work out as a couple, but they are committed to each other. I think that's all that we saw at this end of the season, is just a recommitment to want to work together, to be together. And that's half the battle with love. It's just choosing to go down that road, to paraphrase Cornwell. The two other major characters, Burnham, Spock, and Pike, I'll get to in a second. But I also want to take note of the amazing arcs for our secondary characters. There were characters that I didn't even care about that they ended up making me feel for numerous times throughout the season. And I really like that we got to know a little bit more about the smaller members of the bridge crew. We got Owisha-kun, we got to know her a little bit more. She was a Luddite. We got stuff about Detmer and her injury. And I think the creme de la creme was Ariam. Well, we got a whole episode focused on Ariam leading to her death that really made us feel a gut punch, even for a character that we hadn't really known up to that point, which goes to show how strong the writing was in that episode, and makes me, when I go back and watch season 1 and seeing Ariam there, makes me feel a little bit sadder retroactively. But then we also got really interesting arcs for characters like Laurel. Again, only in one episode really get an arc for Laurel, and we kind of get her a little bit later on in the season, but really her main arc was in episode 3, and I thought was a really good look at women in power. And again, I already did a video analyzing that aspect of her character, so go check that out if you want to hear more of my thoughts. And then we also got some really great work with Amanda and Sarek. Amanda's been a character that kind of just is there as sort of a sage figure for Spock throughout the rest of Star Trek canon, but here really comes into her own and had some really great conflict with Sarek. And I liked seeing Sarek here in these episodes with him sort of feeling the weight of having to be a parent alongside Amanda. Great stuff, especially in the episode where we first meet Spock this season. I thought they had some phenomenal acting between the two of them. And then also a great addition in the character of Jet Reno. While we certainly didn't get a ton of character development for Jet Reno, her small screen time made me absolutely fall in love with her character. Basically a mix of McCoy and Scotty. And I really want to see what she becomes as she grows into season 3 of the show, and hopefully she'll stick around. Alright, speaking of characters, I have to talk about the two biggest aspects that really worked this season. Number one, the relationship between Burnham and Spock. I know a lot of fans were nervous when they heard that Spock was coming into the show, and so was I. And I kind of was worried that they were going to have this sort of mental break sort of thing, because they showed pictures of him in the mental institution throughout the early previews for the season. But honestly, when we got into it, I think the chemistry between Ethan Peck and Sonequa Martin Green was absolutely phenomenal. We really got to feel the arc of their characters, how these were people who really kind of had been pulled away from each other, that Burnham had really hurt Spock. And when we learned what that actual thing was, it was really hurtful. Calling him a half-breed was kind of disgusting, just coming from someone who really cares about you. I mean, I know that feeling as well, being transgender, of having someone who I thought really cared about me saying some really horrible things to me. So I could understand how Spock would feel betrayed and pulled away from her. But then we also got some really great dialogue between the two of them that really made them feel like siblings who knew each other and could quip and make jokes and insult each other in just interesting and fun ways. And then I liked how the season slowly grew their relationship, so we really felt that they came to care about each other, that it wasn't just this easy like, oh, now we're friends again, but we got to see numerous episodes with them struggling to reconnect. And then when Burnham was at her lowest after Mother left her, Burnham and Spock managed to finally reconnect and join together, and we got to see them being really lovely characters, and Spock finding his balance. And then at the end of the season, when Spock has to leave Burnham behind and worries about losing his balance, I actually believed that. And it also deepens his character for when he appears in the original series, which means that they used him really well. Ethan Peck, as an actor, was fantastic. I mean, honestly, I'm not going to rewatch old episodes of the original series without feeling the weight of Michael Burnham and their relationship throughout that entire series. And I think that really adds to what that show is. I could also listen to Ethan Peck's voice all day long. Just his deep voice was so soothing and wonderful and beautiful. Sorry, review. Focus on the review. So those two were absolutely fantastic together. And I think the biggest thing that worked, that is clear by the fact that there's a petition to get him his own show, is Captain Pike. Again, I'm going to make a whole video coming out in 3 weeks that focuses on Captain Pike as a character. But honestly, I think Captain Pike may go down as one of the best, if not the best, captain in Star Trek history. He's a captain who's caring, understanding, he knows how to lead, he allows open discussion, but also knows when to take authority. His theme of sacrifice and service and willing to give himself to his destiny even though it was something that he didn't want for his future, it was honestly some of the most heartbreaking yet beautiful things to watch. And again, deepens his character when he appears in the original series, and makes his accident not an accident, but an intentional choice that he made. And I know a lot of people say that, oh, now that Captain Pike knows his destiny, he should be able to avoid it. But I think it's exactly the opposite. He knows his destiny is coming, and he can't avoid it because of who he is. He knows he gets into that accident because he's saving lives. And so if he abandoned that destiny, he knows people would die. And that's not something he could accept. I think the very act of knowing what his destiny is means that he is choosing to go forward into it. It makes his accident all the more tragic. It makes his ultimate ending, going back to Talos 4, all that much brighter at the end because of it. And again, I just have to say, brilliant captain. The writing for him was just fantastic, and again, props goes to Anson Mount's wonderful, wonderful performance. Deepening his character, deepening the lore, I'm really super excited for what I hope will be a Captain Pike series coming in the future. Speaking of Talos 4, another thing that this season got right was fan service done right. This season didn't just give us random references, like something like Star Trek Into Darkness. The reason Star Trek Into Darkness didn't work, because a lot of the time it was just them going like, hey, look, you remember that thing, that's the thing that happened. Look, it's a Tribble. Look, it's Khan. Look, it's that scene from Wrath of Khan. That doesn't work because it's just evoking something that was already stronger before. We didn't need to see it again, or I would just have gone and watched that movie to see how awesome it was there. Here, though, in Star Trek Discovery Season 2, we get references and recurring storylines that deepen the original characters. I've already talked about how Spock and Pike were really deepened here, but when we see the Enterprise and we get to see that crew and the changes to it, I really evoked love for it. But then Enterprise actually was part and integral to the plot. So it wasn't just pulling at my nostalgia strings, but actually using it to say something, to do something, to have action in a way that made somewhat sense. Yes, it was a bit contrived how Pike got onto the ship in the first place with the Enterprise coming down, but honestly, the rest of it all made sense. And I don't think we could talk about fan service without talking about the Talos 4 episode, if memory serves, because that episode might be the high point of the entire season. What a fantastic callback to all the way back to the original episode of the series, and really, again, deepening Pike, deepening his character, but also giving us stuff like Vina and the Talosians and their power and the cool like little sound effects of the original sound of Talos 4. Really great, strong stuff that again didn't come across as like, hey look, it's the Talosians, isn't that cool? But actually was like, no, the Talosians are integral to the plot. The Talosians are there to help Spock regain his memory. So if you're going to do fan service, that's the way to do it. And speaking of ways to do things, I don't think we could talk about any aspect of Star Trek Discovery without talking about the craft of it all. I've already praised the acting on the show. I just need to restate it here. The acting on this show is top notch. These people, honestly, in my opinion, deserve Emmys, especially Doug Jones and Sonequa Martin Green, Anson Mount, and Ethan Peck. Those four performances just above and beyond anything I've really thought I've seen in Star Trek for a long time. And that's not to say anything bad about the rest of the crew. Everyone else just gave top-notch performances. I also want to give a shout out to Wilson Cruz, who was a character that I liked in season 1, but I didn't particularly love his acting throughout that whole season. But I will say his appearance here in this season of Star Trek Discovery, he nails every beat that he has given. Wilson Cruz did a fantastic job. We also have to praise so much else in the show. The sets were amazing, especially the Enterprise set, the love and care that went into that. There's a wonderful interview on IGN about how they built that bridge, and you should listen to it because it was just fantastically done. I also noted several times throughout the season where the music was just fantastic. I liked when they evoked the original series theme many times, especially in the finale and the premiere episode of the season, but then also a few episodes of the series also had some really excellent score. And this is coming from someone who I usually think that some movies have too much score. I usually like there to be little to no score in a movie because I don't like being told how to feel. I feel like I'm going to get the feeling that I want from watching the actors. And again, the actors were really selling here. That's what made the music really work for me, because it really just reflected the emotions that I was getting from the actors. It wasn't just telling me how to feel. And then there were some moments where this music did evoke a certain feeling, but because it was evoking that nostalgia in a fun and interesting way, again using the TOS theme. And I think we also have to praise the visuals. The visuals and special effects on this season, even compared to last season, were just top notch. It really felt like I was watching a feature-length movie each and every time I tuned in for an episode, especially with the premiere and the finale. You could put put those up and have those be on the big screen and told me it was a movie, and I would have been like, yes, 100% agree with you, that is a Star Trek movie. Honestly, I could go into a whole video in and of itself just praising the individual crafts of this entire season. The cinematography, the music, the acting, the art direction, the production design, all of that stuff was phenomenal. And I cannot praise it enough. It deserves its own whole video talking about it. So don't think just because I'm kind of only touching upon it here that I don't think it deserves the praise that it deservedly needs to get. Speaking of the final episodes, I will say the final episode of this season, and also the premiere episode as well, kind of had this too, really just felt top-notch in some great spectacle, but rooted in action and character that I really haven't seen from a Star Trek show in a very long time. I've so rarely seen this level of spectacle matched with great character work. I think the only spectacle Star Trek that I think did better than that was Star Trek Beyond. I think the spectacle in Star Trek Beyond was absolutely fantastic, but when the spectacle was happening, I didn't really feel the character moments. Not to say that there weren't great character moments in Beyond, but it wasn't really meshed with the action. It was action, character moment, action, character moment. And then it also gave us some really great moments with these characters, a la like Wrath of Khan or Best of Both Worlds. Like, I felt the smaller scale action within the grandiose events. So really just props to the directors and writers of the finale and the premiere as well. And we can't talk about a review of this season without some speculation about the future. Honestly, I think it was a really smart move for the writers of Discovery to choose to send Discovery off into the future and finally give us what hopefully with season 3 will be the future Star Trek show we always wanted, the post-Voyager show that we always wanted. I've talked about this in my live stream, but while I am excited for the Picard show, and I'm sure the Picard show will show us what happens after Nemesis, I am a little bit saddened that it was tied to a specific character. Again, I love Picard and I'm excited to see him again, but I also want a Star Trek show that is given carte blanche to do exactly what it wants to do and do something completely new and different. And so I'm so excited that Star Trek Discovery is going to give us the chance to see that. And then also have a Picard show, and then the Section 31 show, which I have a theory that is probably going to be meshing with PIKE a little bit as well, so we'll get them in that show. So we'll have a TOS era series, a TNG era series, and then a future series doing its own path forward, and that I am really excited for. So honestly, I think a smart decision by the writers of Star Trek Discovery. Whew! So that was a lot of thoughts condensed in this video. I really hope you enjoyed my thoughts on Star Trek Discovery Season 2. What a fantastic season, far from perfect, but even the imperfections gave us some really interesting thoughts to chew on. But what did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe so you can see Sacred Treks and my upcoming character analyses of Star Trek shows, as well as all the other videos that I'm going to be doing on this channel. And until next time, live long and prosper.